Hello, church family. It's been so good to be here. It's good to be here today. Always mixed feelings for me when I head back to Minnesota. Good to see my family. Good to see college friends, but I also miss you guys a lot. And it has been such a blessing to see you this summer. Last week at Church in the Park, if you missed it, it was a treat. But what Jeff talked about was Matthew 6, verses 25 through 34, where Jesus reminds the disciples that when they follow God, God will provide everything that they need. And the provision that God wants to give includes future salvation and eternal security, but it also includes provision for present needs, for crises, for relational needs, for emotional needs. And today we're going to look at a woman named Ruth who experienced this complete provision as she took steps to follow God. Now, the story of Ruth takes place in the book of Ruth, and it takes place at a weird time in the history of the Hebrew people, the descendants of Abraham. It takes place it's called the time of the Judges, and that's what Ruth 1, verse 1 reads. During the time of the Judges, there was a famine in the land of Judah. Now, the time of the Judges people debate how long it actually was, but it was this era between when the Hebrews conquered the land and when they established a monarchy. And the 12 tribes of the Hebrews were still very fragmented. And what would happen is they would worship God for a time, and then they would turn to idols and false gods. And then God would punish them through famine and often foreign oppression. The people would repent and cry out to God. And then a figure called a judge would rise up, be raised by God, and would bring the people freedom from their foreign oppressor. This is why it's called the time of the Judges, because it was a cycle that kept repeating all throughout the book. And the time of the Judges was not a good time in Israelite history. We're told in the book a couple different times that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Everyone did what they wanted, is what that means. And because people are fallen, a lot of things people want to do are evil. And so that's the cycle. That's why it happened. Because people would do what they wanted and then realize that they needed to follow God instead and repent. And so this was a time of great instability and conflict in the Hebrew people. And unfortunately, it was a time where women were particularly taken advantage of. There are two different stories where women feature prominently as good, as God-honoring people. Unfortunately, though, the book of Judges records far more stories of women being sexually taken advantage of, kidnapped, and in general just being vulnerable to physically stronger people. Again, it's not a good thing that this was the reality, but unfortunately, this is what many women experienced during this time of instability. And this is when the story of Ruth takes place, this time of famine, sometime during this cycle, this chaos. And so we read, and so that's what verse 1 of book 1 tells us. The original Hebrew hearer and reader would have recognized that instantly, but we're removed from that, so for me as well, we need some context. And so there's a famine, most likely as a result of idolatry among the people. And so the rest of 1 verse 1 says, So a man from Bethlehem in Judah went to live as a resident foreigner in the region of Moab, along with his wife and his 2 sons. And this is another point where the original hearers would have instantly understood what was going on. Because the Moabites were a distinct people in that time. They occupied a land southeast of the Hebrew people. And they are actually related to the Hebrew people, because the Hebrews are descendants of Abraham. The Moabites are descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot. And the way these people had kind of a very disturbing origin story where Lot's two daughters tricked him into fathering a child in their womb. And so it was one of the daughters, her sons was named Moab, and so his descendants are the Moabites. And so not only did they originate in a sordid way, they also demonstrated a real lack of compassion to the Hebrew people. Because the Moabites played a significant role in leading the Hebrews towards idolatry a couple of different times in the Old Testament. They also withheld food from the Israelites while they were migrating after their release from Egypt, the Hebrews. And then during the Judges, the Moabites were used by God to oppress the Israelites. And so a Hebrew reading that a Hebrew person moved into Moab would have cringed, like, oh, that's not good. Why are you going there to that people? And so they had a really, really bad background and bad reputation. And it was an earned reputation in many ways. And so then Ruth, the next bit of Ruth says that the man's name was Elimelech, his wife was Naomi, and both her sons married Moabite women. One was named Orpah, and one was named Ruth, the character that the book is named after. And so they went to Moab because the fields in Moab had grain. Israel had famine, but Moab had grain. And so they went to Moab, again, hoping to find stability and provision during this time of great instability and conflict among the Hebrew people. But unfortunately, the life that Elimelech and his wife wanted to find did not materialize. Elimelech dies, and then Naomi's two sons die as well. And so we have three women as widows in a foreign land without any male relatives. And this was and so they were experiencing the pain, the confusion, and the sadness that comes with grieving loved ones. It's an awful time. The story, it goes very quick at this point. So they probably passed away in very close proximity to each other. And because this is the time of the Judges, the three women are also incredibly vulnerable, because in that time, the male family members owned the land and managed the harvest, and the males were responsible for providing for the females. It's a more patriarchal society and also very kin-based. And so the extended family could have stepped in. The two widows had family, but for one reason or another, they're not mentioned in the story. And Naomi didn't have anyone. In an era where family was everything and male family members were particularly important, Naomi didn't have anyone around. So there was no one responsible to provide for her, and also no safety net. And a commentary I read puts it like this: with neither husband nor sons to care for her, a widow's options in the ancient world would have been to sell herself into slavery, to eke out a living through prostitution, or die of neglect. And I'm not saying this to minimize the pain and the confusion that comes with lost loved ones. It is unfortunately a part of these women's stories. And I believe the author included this because the author wants to say something about crisis and vulnerable circumstances, as well as everything that comes with losing a loved one. And so in the midst of this, Naomi hears some good news, that there's grain in Israel again. The Hebrew people have a harvest. And so she starts to travel back to where her and her husband left from. And the two Moabite widows initially follow Naomi, and then Naomi speaks to them. She's thankful for Orpah and Ruth's loyalty to her, but she also pleads with them to return to Moab so that they can find husbands. And again, in this time, in this place, the male was the one to provide for the female. So what Naomi really wanted was for Orpah and Ruth to find security and provision, because the men would give it in that time. And Naomi also recognizes that she probably can't provide a husband for them. She's too old to have more kids. And so she is responsible. In that time and age, Naomi would have been responsible to find a husband for Orpah and Ruth. And she doesn't think she can do that. So she's really pleading with them to go and find security. And Naomi's also thankful for Orpah and Ruth. She's thankful for the way they followed her and showed loyalty to her. So it's also, she cares about them. And Orpah goes back. Orpah goes back to Moab. But Ruth is determined to stay with Naomi to return to the promised land. And so this is what Cameron read aloud for our call to worship, where Ruth says, "Stop urging me to abandon you, for wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I do not keep my promise. Only death will be able to separate me from you." And in this declaration, we see that Ruth is turning to the one true God. She's expressed loyalty to Naomi, but this is the first time she expresses it to Naomi's God, and expresses not just loyalty, but a desire to follow God. And so, from this point, we see Naomi and Ruth return to Bethlehem. We're still in chapter 1. And when Naomi and Ruth return, the women of the town are excited, because most of the women would have been extended family members. So they're seeing their relative again. And the book records them saying, "Can this be Naomi?" There are a few different ways to translate, but there's an excitement. And Naomi replies to the women of the town, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Now this part relies on the meaning of the names. Naomi means pleasant, and Mara means bitter. So Naomi's basically saying, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter, because the Lord has made my life bitter. It's easy to see why she has this belief. Again, everything that comes with losing loved ones, as well as the crisis that she is in. And it just highlights where Naomi is at. And while she does have Ruth is with her. Ruth is a Moabite outsider, again, from a people that were viewed very negatively, that would have been viewed negatively by the people in the town. And so they don't have their physical needs met at all. They're in a place where they can be met, but no family member has stepped up to provide for them at the moment. They also don't have relationships. Naomi's been gone for at least 10 years. We're not sure how long for sure. So everyone she knew has changed. And again, Ruth doesn't know anybody. She's never been here before. And that's on top of the emotional and the spiritual difficulty of losing loved ones. And in this day, widows had legal rights, but it was very rare that they actually experienced them if they didn't have someone to advocate for those rights. And they didn't because they didn't have any male family members. And again, it's also the time of the judges during great instability. And so chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth in the town, but still unsure how their crisis is going to be solved. And so in chapter 2, Ruth asks permission to go and glean in someone else's field. because we're told the barley harvest is just beginning. Now, in the Israelite law code, harvesters were told to leave grain behind for those in need to gather it up for them. Leave the edges of the field unharvested, a couple of other things. And gleaning was just going to grab the left behind grain to feed yourself. And so that's what Ruth is asking to do. And she happens to go and glean in a field owned by Boaz. Now, Boaz is a relative of Naomi's husband, so he's their family as well. And as a male, he's one responsible for taking care of these women. And it's a fascinating scene. I don't have time to go over it in depth. But basically what happens is Boaz notices Ruth, because Ruth is working very hard. And Ruth also asked for permission to do more gleaning than the law technically allowed her for. And so Boaz commends Ruth for her loyalty to Naomi, and also commends her for choosing to follow Naomi's God as her God. Again, your God will be my God. And so Boaz provides for her, but he does so above and beyond what the law requires. He gave her fresh food. That wasn't required by the law. He gave her water, not explicitly required in the law. He also let Ruth gather grain, not just from what was left behind, but also from what the harvesters had gathered and set aside. And so Ruth accepts his offer, and as a result, she experiences wonderful, extravagant provision. And she stays until the harvests are over, so about 7 weeks. And we see that the short-term crisis has been relieved. Ruth has found a place to belong, where before she didn't have any connections. They found food. Boaz also ensures their safety, again, in a time where women were tragically taken advantage of. And they also have social standing, because they're being adopted by a wealthy man who follows God. And at the very end of this chapter, Naomi calls Boaz. Ruth goes back to the house where her and Naomi are staying. And Naomi calls Boaz a kinsman-redeemer. And this is a specific responsibility within the law, not just to provide for women of the family, but also to buy any land that a family member would have sold. And that would keep the land within the family, and so it would be passed to that person's family. And also, that land could be used to provide for those that formerly owned it, those that had sold it in the first place. And Naomi is aware of this, and she waits until the harvests are over to make another move, because they found crisis relief for those 7 weeks. But once the harvest is over, there's no grain in a field left over to gather. There's nothing to get. So the long-term reality is still very dire. And Naomi recognizes this. And so in Ruth chapter 3, Naomi tells Ruth, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours?" And again, that's that kinsman-redeemer station that he held in the family. And so Naomi tells Ruth to go to Boaz and basically wake him up in the middle of the night and just sit there and wait for Boaz's instructions. And so Ruth goes to Boaz and then wakes him up. It's kind of funny. The original Hebrew, it basically says Boaz woke up and look, there was a woman at his feet. Because he was just taking care of chores, and then he's like, what's going on? We would be too if we were woken up in the middle of the night. And so Boaz asks Ruth to identify herself. And Ruth says, I am Ruth, your servant. And then she says something really interesting, which is really hard to translate. Then the NIV says it as, Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Other translations use the word kinsman-redeemer. A different translation just translates it as Ruth saying, marry me, because you are a guardian of the family interests. Now, the word garment is really important in this scene, because it can also be, it does mean garment. It's used to describe clothes in other stories. But it can also mean wing, like the wings of a bird. And in that area, not in Israelite religion, but in other religions of the time, there were these winged deities that were kind of the warrior gods, and they would be the ones that would fight in the heavens, in the spiritual realm, while armies were battling on earth. And so a winged god would extend their wing and protect and fight for a certain people group. And so I believe there's reason to wonder if Ruth is asking Boaz to do that sort of thing. Because in the Old Testament, there are many passages which describe God outstretching his wings to fight for his people. There are passages that describe the Hebrews going under God's wings for protection, for shelter. So it's a very loaded word that doesn't necessarily make sense if it's garment. So again, and also God specifically provides his shelter to refugees, to victims of instability, which Ruth and Naomi are. And so that's the first thing she's asking Boaz to do. And then she gives weight to that request, again, by saying he's a kinsman-redeemer, someone responsible for keeping the family and the property together. And there's something else, that the marriage is a different custom in the law. And what's important is that it is not something that Boaz is required to do. It's something that Ruth is asking him to do, to marry her, but legally he only has to function as this kinsman-redeemer to keep the family and the land together. And I would speculate that Ruth is bringing Boaz into her family circle, not just Naomi. She's saying, you're my family, not just my mother-in-law's family. And so Ruth is asking Boaz to bring her and Naomi into the covenant community, to fulfill his legal obligations, and also to protect them and give them the long-term provision that they are lacking. Because again, the harvest is over, and they don't have anywhere else to go at this point. And so in this case, Boaz would function as that kinsman-redeemer by buying the land that Naomi's husband had sold before they moved. But there's a twist in the story, because Boaz is not the only kinsman-redeemer. In this time, it was kind of a line of succession. Certain people had first dibs to be the kinsman-redeemer, and Boaz was not the one that had first dibs. He was not first in line for this responsibility. And so Boaz promises to negotiate with this kinsman-redeemer to try and buy the land and marry Ruth. And he does it the next day, and when it's clear that the other person doesn't want to marry Ruth, the other person backs off and lets Boaz take that responsibility. So he buys the land, and then he marries Ruth. And then him and Ruth have a son. And interestingly, this son is given to Naomi as hers to raise, as hers to grow up, because Naomi's husband's line was over. The sons had passed away. There was no one to inherit the property. And so this son was considered to be a son of Naomi and her husband, so that the land could go within that family. And in Ruth 4, verses 14 through 17, this is what we see. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman-redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life, and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The woman living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And so in this scene, we see that Naomi and Ruth have that long-term provision. Boaz is married to Ruth, and so he can provide for her, shelter her, protect her. And he bought the land. And so the harvest of this land would have been used to care for Naomi until Obed was old enough to take care of it himself, and then provide for his mother and keep it down the line. And then this also puts her in the line of King David, and therefore the line of the promised Messiah. And oftentimes, we focus on Boaz as the kinsman-redeemer, and specifically as a foreshadowing or a type of Christ. That's what that means. Someone who portrayed Christ's characteristics, some of them in certain ways. And it is very true in the story. Boaz bought Naomi and Ruth as we were bought at the cross. He took her, Ruth, as a bride. We're called the spiritual bride of Christ. We're brought into the family of God, and Boaz brought Ruth and Naomi back into the family of the Hebrew people. And those are all very true. I just wonder if that is more abstract than the story is going for, because it deals with very practical realities: starvation, crises, loss. And so I believe status in a community, relationships, all very concrete, very real problems. And so I believe we also see Christ-likeness in the way Boaz addresses these problems. Ruth came from a messed up background, a people that are a product of incest, that are idolatrous and ungenerous and immoral. And now she's been adopted into God's chosen people, and she's living a life of blessing. Her background has not held her back from the Lord. The women were isolated refugees, not moving as a result of war, as today, but still instability. And Ruth, as an immigrant, was at the bottom of the social hierarchy, and an immigrant, again, from a sordid background. And Boaz then elevates them to honored members in the community with a place to belong, with a family to belong to. Ruth and Naomi start the story with a bleak future, full of uncertainty and hardship, again, where the most likely options were slavery, prostitution, or death. But now they have stability and safety because their needs are completely met. They can have rest and peace. They started the story with incredible loss, and now God has given them new family members to help with that. And so this is a great example of status reversal. Someone at the very bottom who had very little to look forward to, elevated to someone very high in the community with the crisis and the long-term problems solved. And the story also highlights Naomi in particular. It shifts back to her at the very end in what I just read, where it says, Naomi has a son. She has a kinsman-redeemer. And she started the story confused, with feeling bitter and emptiness in her life. Again, totally understandable. And now she has a level of joy and thankfulness. There was now new life to replace the hardship and the loss she experienced. And so this story is an example of how God meets physical needs along with spiritual and emotional and mental needs. And I believe that, again, foreshadows Christ. Because we see in Isaiah 40, verses 28 through 31, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is an eternal God, the creator of the whole earth. He does not get tired or weary. There is no limit to his wisdom. He gives strength to those who are tired. To the ones who lack power, he gives renewed energy. Even youths get weary. Even strong young men clumsily stumble. But those who wait for the Lord's help find renewed strength. They rise up as if they had eagle's wings. They run without growing weary. They walk without getting tired. And this is what Ruth and Naomi experienced. And I believe that this is what all of us can experience as well. When our future looks bleak, when life is harder than usual, when we have legitimate crises that we don't know how they're going to get solved. Naomi and Ruth's story is an example for us that God provides completely. God provides strength when we don't have any. God is wise, and so we can trust that he has a plan for our life. And this plan, again, includes the physical provision that Naomi and Ruth experienced. We can also have rest. Different translations of this verse say, those who wait upon the Lord shall soar on eagle's wings. And that translation specifically, I like how it captures the peace we have in the Lord. And this is not a peace that is just abstract. It's a peace that comes with complete provision and complete healing. And so for those that feel that are in the middle of incredible crises, please hear that God loves you and God understands what's going on. And he wants to make your life totally different. He wants to give you the transformation and the healing brought about in Naomi's life and in Ruth's life. I don't know when, don't know how, but he promises it. Why not you? So often we ask, why me? How me? What can happen? Why not? God is good. He is able. And then I believe this passage also has something to say for those that have spent significant time with the Lord, that have experienced the Lord's complete provision in different crises. It's a reminder to trust him in present crises, to look back at his previous provision, to trust him for your present circumstances. And I believe it's also a reminder to act like Boaz, to be present in the community and be someone who helps the needs of others. And this is not, I'm not saying this to condemn the church. I love this church. I just believe that there are several different angles for self-examination, to pray and ask the Lord, is there more here that you want me to do? Again, not condemnation, but self-examination. Because Boaz, he saw a crisis, and then he intervened to help. Are we a church that looks out for those in crisis? Can they come to us and get help, as Ruth and Naomi went to Boaz and got help? And Boaz also put time, effort, and energy into addressing the whole situation, the acute need that they felt for long-term provision. Are we people that use what God has given us? Or do we use what God has given us to help walk people through what's going on in their life, as Boaz did for Ruth and Naomi? Are we helping those maybe on the edges of a community find a place to belong, a place to rest, a place to have a family, as Boaz did? And it's not highlighted as much in the story, but I do believe that it is interesting that Ruth was an immigrant, and both Ruth and Naomi were refugees. Are there options that the Lord has for us to help people that are ministering in those scenarios? Again, this is not a condemnation. This is a chance for self-examination that I need to take on as well. And so the story of Ruth is complex. It's fascinating. There's so much more that I could not go into. And what we see in it is total provision in the lives of believers. As Ruth followed God, as she said, your God will be my God. As she followed him, God provided. And so that is what we can learn from Ruth, to follow God, so that he may provide for us. Because he wants to. Because there are so many people that are lost and that need the good news of eternal security as well as present provision. And so as the worship team could come up, the last song we're going to sing is called Graves into Gardens. And I believe it really captures this hope. Because the bridge says, you turn graves into gardens, you turn bones into armies, you turn seas into highways. That those experiencing an incredibly intense life can look forward to a life of provision. And that those of us who've experienced the provision can celebrate and be thankful for all that God has done in our lives. All that God did in Naomi's life and in Ruth's life, and all he wants to do in the lives of those around us. Thank you all for coming today. It was a blessing to see you. If anything in the service stirred something in you, or if there's something that's been on your heart, please feel free to come to the front and ask for prayer when we're done. And the benediction today is Isaiah 40, verses 28 through 31. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is an eternal God, the creator of the whole earth. He does not get tired or weary. There is no limit to his wisdom. He gives strength to those who are tired. To the ones who lack power, he gives renewed energy. Even youths get tired and weary. Even young men clumsily stumble. But those who wait for the Lord's help find renewed strength. They rise up as if they had eagle's wings. They run without getting weary. They walk without getting tired. God bless and go in peace.